In recent weeks, global markets have been held captive to the sovereign debt issues of Greece and other countries in Mediterranean Europe. Tonight, it looks like the stronger economies of the EU won't let Greece default if Greece agrees to some deep budget cuts. Against this backdrop, the US recovery has been jobless so far, and the White House is struggling with a multi-trillion-dollar budget black hole. Dow Chemical is a giant of industry with a global footprint across a number of sectors. Its chairman and president, Andrew Liveris, is currently in Australia. I spoke to him earlier today about the year ahead in the developed economies. Andrew Liveris, welcome to Late Line Business.
Thank you, Whitney. Nice to be with you.
All right, looking at the sovereign debt issue, do you think that Greece's situation has the potential to destabilise the emergence of a fragile global recovery?
The issue on Greece, and for that matter Portugal and some of the other weaker economies in the Eurozone, is a Eurozone issue. I believe that at the end of the day what you're going to see is that there's going to be help and assist here with some pretty specific must-dos by the Greek government. So I would believe that the destabilization should be minimal. I believe the countries like Germany and France in particular are stable. They're doing quite well. And I think that will keep the Eurozone from sliding or backsliding.
All right, you say it's a Eurozone issue, but it's come to light that Wall Street investment banks have been caught up in this sovereign debt issue. Do you find that surprising, particularly that you're on the board of Citigroup?
Well, firstly, Whitney, as you know, I can't really comment on anything to do with the board of Citi, and I have no knowledge of what Citi did or did not do in the Greece situation. We at Dow, we are investors in the Eurozone. We're very large in Germany. We understand the stability issue, certainly the currency issue, the fiscal deficit issue, and I think it's a de minimis issue in the context of the financial flows within the Eurozone if the governments of Europe, in particular Germany and France, step up. And I think that's what you're going to see.
Is the United States government concerned that the downturn of 2008 and 9 was just the first wave of what will be a double-dip recession?
Yeah, look, a double dip is a context of what's been going on these last 3 or 4 months. I think we're very ubiquitous in the economy. We're in many value chains, all the way from construction to automotive to appliances, you name it. We've seen massive restocking occurring in the United States, which is a very positive sign, but it's uneven. And what you are asking about 3 or 4 months ago, I think was a major concern. Frankly, we think it's a very low probability today. You are going to see weak recovery. You've heard the terms used, a U recovery or a Nike swoosh. I think the US is going to feel like that for another year or two. But backsliding, I don't think will occur.
Andrew Liveris, you're no stranger to bringing a company back from the brink of collapse, and I'm obviously referring here to how you turned around Dow after the K-Dow deal went south. So what do you suggest should be done to avoid a double-dip recession?
Well, I think credit flows and making sure that we don't knee-jerk and over-regulate banks such that small and medium-sized enterprises get access to capital and to credit is a very key point, Whitney. I would say that large corporates like ours, we can access the debt markets, we can access capital flows. We at Dow, as you just referenced, are in very good shape today. But small and medium enterprises don't have access to credit. And if you start over-constricting and over-regulating banks, then you're going to see a lot of domino effects, especially among small and medium-sized enterprises.
There's been a lot of talk about winding back stimulus and when and how that should occur. Given the current situation, do you think that we'll see a sustained period of stimulus?
Whitney, I think the rest of this year, we're going to see the rest of the already announced stimulus find its way into the value chain. I think you're going to find that that'll create new consumption, restocking, and new demand. And as we go to the back half of this year, that will create basically a US economy that's 2.5% growth. By then, I think your question becomes very pertinent, which is really what's after that? Is there a US consumer spending with confidence, or is the unemployment rate going to keep dragging down the actual US consumer's appetite? And we believe that latter situation is more likely than not, which then speaks back to the earlier question on the recovery being slow and tenuous for the next 18 months to 24 months.
We've seen some moderately positive signs in the United States and the employment front, with the jobless rate falling. But when do you think that US companies will really start hiring again?
Well, I think this question is the huge question of the day. I mean, our company had a 30% reduction in capacity year on year in the United States. We shuttered 44 facilities. That's going to take a while before we need new capacity, and for that matter, for the consumption to actually demand new capacity. What's helping the US is exports. And I do believe the administration is very focused on creating stimulus to continue to fund ways to export relevant goods to the world. That's not necessarily a great thing to do. I mean, you need domestic consumption, but I think we're very, very focused on seeing when the exports will continue in a way that is sustained.
You mentioned that there should be a greater focus on exports. Does that suggest that there'll be a risk of more protectionism then?
Yeah, I do definitely think that protectionism is topic du jour. I believe as a businessman that the world needs to re-enjoin Doha and put free trade back into the conversation. So flows of goods and services are multilateral. But I think the reality is that for the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to be very much focused on bilateral agreements.
All right, just briefly on climate change, are you surprised in Australia and other areas of the world that we're still having the debate over whether or not climate change is actually happening?
Well, as the discussion around climate change becomes political, the one thing it shouldn't become is challenging science. I think science is science. Science is not perfect. There was a few hundred years before people recognized that gravity existed, well proven earlier, right? So I think that the conversation is, how do we put mechanisms in place to control the amount of CO2 that we as humankind do emit? And why should we risk future generations by questioning the science? We should be working on policies that allow us to mitigate the amount of man-made, human-made CO2 in the air, period. Those policies are not going to be easy, and they are going to take time. And it's the intersection of public policy, business, NGOs, and science that will get us those answers. I'm not surprised in the least that it's taken this amount of debate, dialogue, and discussion. After all, you'll get better answers that way, but we need to do it.
Andrew Liveris, thanks for joining Lateline Business.
Thank you, Whitney, very much for your questions, and I appreciate all the things that you asked me about.
A knock on the door from a taxman is one which all businesses dread, but in some cases the door is literally being knocked down, and accountants are concerned the ATO could overstep the mark in the pursuit of unpaid taxes. David Spicer reports.